So yeah, I'm from HORIBA-MIRA in the UK. So we're an automotive external service provider providing automotive development tools and test facilities for OEMs and tier ones. And I'm going to talk to you today about how we use digital twin to develop modern powertrains using some of our intelligent lab methodologies. So the scope of what we're trying to achieve is based upon the emissions regulations that are currently set in Europe and the US and throughout the rest of the world. So today we have a very narrowly defined window for a vehicle to be compliant within. So they have to be compliant for particular driving styles and pollutants. And although the tests today are quite difficult to complete, the boundaries are very well defined. So long as you stay within those boundaries, the test or the pollutant criteria are usually below the emissions limits. However, when we move to future regulations, so Euro 7 that's going to come in the middle of this decade, the pollutant criteria standards become a lot tighter and trips basically become infinite. So trips are easy to complete successfully, but the permutations are infinite. So you can have any type of driving style, any type of driving conditions. So that might be high altitude, cold temperature, low altitude, hot temperature. So there are a lot more permutations that are available to test and be compliant within. So in order to be able to make sure your powertrain is compliant, we need some way of not only utilizing physical testing, but also leveraging simulation. And that's where the digital twin comes in for modern powertrain development. So to kind of look at it another way is that you might have a suite of worst case road tests that you need to do in order to make sure that your powertrain is compliant. So you drive your vehicle across different routes throughout Europe, and you measure the emissions, and you hopefully find that the emissions are below the limit. But you can't do that for every single test drive cycle. That's the reason why we're going to test a few of them, but then we're going to predict via simulation for the remaining cycles, if you like. So this provides then a data pack to the legislative bodies to show that you've done your due diligence with regards to physically testing the worst case scenarios, and you've done as much as you can, but then you've also got a data pack then of predictions to show that your vehicle will be compliant under these kind of edge case scenarios. So another way to kind of look at it is if you take some of the boundary conditions for the Euro 7 emissions regulations that are coming in the middle of this decade, you've got to be within a certain altitude, certain driver aggressivity, certain temperature window. So you'd physically test on the road your worst case cycles, whatever they might be, and then you'd fill in the box then with predictions via simulation using a digital twin approach in our case. And what we do is we leverage road testing techniques, rig testing techniques, and simulation in order to build a digital twin of a powertrain. So let me put my laser pointer on. The experimental design, as I'm sure everybody is aware, is the key attribute with regards to building a digital twin. So we spend a lot of time using our own in-house developed tool sets to make sure the experimental design that we're going to test the unit under test under is representative of how that powertrain or vehicle might be operated in the real world. So we would then deploy that experimental design to the unit under test. So that might be using engine dynos or chassis dynamometers, where we're testing an engine, a powertrain, or a vehicle, and we generate the training data. And we take that data offline and create models with it. So again, we use our own in-house developed recurrent neural network and machine learning tool sets to develop very lightweight models that are extremely accurate. And then obviously we need to validate these models. And once we've validated these models, we have very accurate models of different performance and emissions attributes, such as things like fuel consumption or engine out emissions or tailpipe emissions. What we do then with those models is we couple them with virtual or real world driving scenarios. So we can either use third party software that allows you to very explicitly define a real world driving condition in simulation. It's a bit like playing Gran Turismo on your PlayStation. where there would be a virtual vehicle that drives a particular scenario, a particular route, and then we take the data from those scenarios and then couple them with the models that have been built, and we can very quickly predict responses for that scenario. So it allows you to batch up, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of scenarios that would be physically impossible to drive in the real world, and then couple them with the performance and emissions models that have been built and predict responses. So you've got this huge suite of data then, where the limitation really becomes the engineer looking at the data to try and identify these hotspots, we call them. So these are unfavorable areas of engine operation or powertrain operation or vehicle operation that cause excursions in emissions that might fall foul of the legislative limits. So we can identify these hotspots. So there might be peaks in emissions at very well-used speed and torques or vehicle velocities. And then what we'd aim to do is go back to the vehicle or the powertrain under test and recalibrate it to mitigate these hotspots and ultimately improve the cycle result and make sure it is below the legislative limit. One of the main benefits of our particular digital twinning methodology is that nowadays powertrain sharing is commonplace amongst light duty OEMs and even heavy duty truck manufacturers, where a single powertrain is used in multiple vehicles. So if we can stress test and characterize that powertrain across its full operational range, we can then deploy it with different vehicle models then that will just utilize the same engine but in a different way. So that's the power of the digital twin then in our case, is that for a single digital twin you can couple it with multiple vehicles, and then you can create models of those different, well, you've already got the model, the empirical models, and then you can predict for the different vehicles that adopt the same powertrain. So it's very advantageous, and rather than having suites of different vehicles adopting the same powertrain and testing them physically, you can do this in simulation, which is key for reducing the amount of time that's required to ultimately test your vehicle across the forthcoming regulations in Europe. We've estimated that by adopting our digital twinning approach, compared to physical testing and gathering a suite of data basically that would give you good coverage across the regulatory boundaries, if you were to try and achieve the same amount of coverage but using testing and simulation digital twinning, we anticipate that the reduction in test time is about 70%. That sounds rather large and unbelievable, but if you do the maths, this is how it works out. And based upon some work that we had done with Frost and Sullivan, we estimate that this saves around $5 million per vehicle program by adopting a digital twinning approach for powertrain development. And that's it, short and sweet. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Phil, question for yourself, please. Fantastic presentation. Can you also comment on whether you leverage your DT for digital validation, verification, and certification?
Yeah, so I guess we can. So if you mean testing something digitally and then creating a digital twin of a digital product, maybe. So we can do that. So if you can measure it, you can model it, right? So yeah, yes, we can. So going back to kind of the original scope of our presentation, we, depending on the level of maturity of the powertrain of the vehicle, depends on whether we are trying to identify hotspots very early on in the vehicle or the powertrain development, or whether we've got a mature product whereby we're trying to identify perhaps unfavorable operating conditions out on the road. So yeah, yes, we can do it.
Phil, question for yourself here. To remove the spikes and reduced effects of aggressive driving, is there an appetite to use this level of analysis across the automotive industry to argue for permanently reducing the power of performance cars? For example, less force equals less energy. Thanks.
Possibly. I'm not quite sure why you would want to do that, but yes, you can. I mean, aggressive. When we say aggressive driving, we don't mean kind of dangerous driving. It's just more dynamic at on the pedal, basically. So the engine will react according to the pedal inputs, but you need some level of transient behavior on the engine, otherwise you'd never be able to move forward at a decent rate. So, and with regards to permanently reducing the power of performance cars, I mean, once you are up to the vehicle speed you want to be at, the power consumption is very small. It's only the initial kind of surge of power to get you up to the speed that you would need to be up to that is high, but once you're cruising, the power consumption is very low. So I mean, you can do that, but I would question why you would want to do that, basically.
Very good. And last 10 seconds, if you can, this question here for yourself, Phil. Have you noticed that the automotive industry as a whole has begun to use digital twins to improve the industry?
No, that's the reason why we've developed them.